So, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is the final film of the Mission Impossible series, I think, at least from the way that it's framed here, because it definitely does feel like this saga is coming to a close. I mean, this is obviously the continuation of Dead Reckoning from a few years back, which should have an intriguing premise of this like sentient AI called the Entity that is kind of working its way through, manipulating humanity for its own gain. And that's an intriguing premise, but the thing is, for the Final Reckoning, they really do stress that this is the last Mission Impossible film, and realizing that, they kind of want this saga to go out not so much with a bang, but kind of more of like almost like a nostalgic whimper, I think is the best way. But it's kind of like how, it's the last day of school, and everyone's mostly checked out here, so it kind of feels like, this is like, it's like it's one last mission. It's one last chance to enjoy Tom Cruise playing Ethan Hunt on another one of his exciting adventures with all the fun stunts and all the intrigue and all the spy tech and all the stuff that we've come to love from the Mission Impossible films. And to the film's credit, the returning director, Christopher McQuarrie, he doesn't skimp on a lot of the cool stunts and effects. But, for co-writing the script as well, he does kind of lack on a lot of the twists and the intrigue that kind of made Mission Impossible a little bit more exciting than just for like its visuals and for all of, Tom Cruise's stunts, which, don't get me wrong, they're great and they're fun. And in this film, they're definitely a lot of fun. It kind of feels like this movie is a little bit more of kind of like the greatest hits. Because it feels like familiar stunts that we've seen before, except, they play them up with like a few little extra bells and whistles and like get a little creative and inventive with it. So it kind of feels like greatest hits, but with like some interesting renditions on stuff that we've seen before. But unfortunately, the story doesn't quite match like the intricate nature of how the action scenes are set up, because at this point in the story, like, they've kind of established what the Entity is and why they need like the MacGuffin of these keys to shut it down, and and people who are working for the Entity, they've revealed all that within like the last film, with all the surprises and the deceptions, and there isn't much of that in this film, despite this film runs like close to 3 hours, and it's mostly just like characters know explicitly what they're supposed to do in this film without too much surprise. And I wish kind of like the film kind of played up the fact that Ethan and his crew are kind of used to this. Like, they're kind of, and to some degree they kind of are, but they're not used to it enough where I think they can play with it. Like, I do like the fact that, for the returning actors they have here, of course, you have Ving Rhames back as Luther, and I do like kind of the ease that Luther has. Like, even when like Luther is like kind of like sick and still trying to do his job, he almost has like this very casual nature. Like, at one point he has to defuse like nukes, which is again is like very common for this type of job, and he just kind of has almost like the most casual conversation when Ethan arrives, and Luther's just like, yeah, I'm disarming a nuke, yep, hey, how's it going, not taking my eyes off the work, you want to chit chat? It's and I wish there were more elements like that in the film, because like I said, this film wants to stress so much that this is the last film, and it kind of like, and instead of like, embracing all like the intrigue and the smarts, it kind of just laces everything with a bit of a like a one last time vibe to it, because there are stakes here where like characters die, but unlike previous Mission Impossible films where, if a character died, like it was sudden and shocking and it really like stressed the danger, there are some deaths here that are kind of just like telegraphed, and there's enough time to deliver like a dying monologue and a speech, and just realizing that you have to sacrifice yourself, and just like, that's not usually what I expect from the mission. Usually when like the deaths happen and like Ethan has to endure losing someone again, it hits a lot harder, and here I don't think it hits as well, and I don't think it's because like I don't appreciate the characters. Like, you have Simon Pegg returning as Benji, who's still a lot of fun, even though if he's mostly just there to spout technical exposition. You have Haley Atwell returning as Grace, who is a skilled pickpocket. Again, she's just kind of, it seems like she's more or less there as like the love interest and like the essential thief here. She does serve as like a love interest for Ethan, but I think like Ethan is almost like too aware at this point. Like, look, I've lost a lot of women in this line of work, so I've got to get lucky. She's not gonna die in this one, right? Like, I know that I'm pretty much going to be lucky with this girl in this story. So I kind of like a little bit of that knowing element. I just wish there were more of it, because like the AI of the entity, his big scheme here is so underwhelming that like don't get me wrong, it's a threat to the world, but his motivations are so simplistic that they start equating it to biblical tales. Like, it's that easy for them to like figure out, and at one point, like it the whole scheme of the AI is pretty much just revealed like about like a little bit like halfway through the film, that after that point you're not so much worried about what the AI is going to do to outsmart Ethan and his crew. You're just watching Ethan go through the motions and just hope that, you know, like the forces of nature or like, you know, some Russians here or there won't throw him off his trail of just trying to get everything he needs to shut down this AI so that it won't like set off nukes, which, you know, setting off nukes. So what else is new? And I think that's like such a huge problem with trying to do like a final Mission Impossible film, because every single one of these films has always been about, you know, like the fate of the world is at stake. If we don't succeed, you know, nukes are going to go off and the world's going to be at war and everything's going to be destroyed. It's like, that's every film. So when you have one last film where the nukes are going to go off, you know, how do you stress more of like, you know, like a, you know, like more intrigue and more surprises and more danger? And I think almost kind of, I think that the Final Reckoning almost kind of doesn't know how to do that, and instead it just kind of like goes through the motions, but kind of, you know, stresses how like this might not be a mission that Ethan will return from, which again, you know, you can kind of sense that similar tone in a lot of the other Mission Impossible films. But with the Final Reckoning, they want you to believe that no, maybe Ethan won't make it out alive, which you know, it's hard to, you know, appreciate that danger when, you know, you kind of suspect that he will live at the end of this. Like, I won't reveal who lives and who dies in this, but the way that it's framed, it feels more like a typical action blockbuster with all like the cliches and the hallmarks. Like, you know, there's the daring, you know, snipping of the wires to get the, you know, the bomb to shut off. There's running from a bomb at just the right moment. There's, you know, there's a daring airplane chases, and there's, you know, fantastic underwater sequences and jets flying. And there's like, you know, Angela Bassett as the president, and the DEFCON clock is clicking down, and they've only got so many days and hours left to just stop this AI from the nukes going off. And it's like, okay, not bad, but, you know, for Mission Impossible films, this is kind of just a little too stock. And the fact that this film, it gets really sentimental with how much it loves like the Mission Impossible legacy. I will say this though, if you are a Mission Impossible fan and you've been rewatching all the films before you go in to see the Final Reckoning, you will be rewarded, because there are elements from like the first film back in the 90s and then the third film from like the mid 2000s that play a crucial role in this plot. So if you've been keeping track of everything, you'll kind of be rewarded for that. And I think I don't think it's so much like intricate as the film kind of wants you to believe it is, because it wants to stage everything so it's like, oh, all the films are connected, so this character from the first film, he's going to connect to this crucial element in the last film, and oh, you remember in the MacGuffin in the third film and how we really didn't talk about it? Well, here's what the MacGuffin actually does. And it's like, okay, that's clever, but it's not as clever as, you know, double and triple agents deceiving each other and, you know, pulling off masks and revealing ulterior motives and staging, you know, covert operations. It's like that's the stuff that made stuff like Dead Reckoning and Mission Impossible Fallout such good films in this saga, because they had all the cool stunts and everything, but they also had that additional element of constantly being surprised by like the mystery and the espionage of it all. And not so much of that is here. It's mostly just getting sentimental of just recalling everything from past Mission Impossible films. Now, that said, of course, you know, the big draw here is going to be the stunts. And yes, they are a lot of fun here. Like I said, they're familiar stunts in terms of their, you know, in terms of what Cruise does. But I think the way that they're staged, like I said, there's a bit more playfulness and creativeness in how they stage them. Like, for instance, there's another scene here where Tom Cruise has to go underwater. Like, obviously, you know, the finding the keys involves this downed submarine, which they established in the last film. So obviously we're going to get an underwater sequence here, but it's a fun underwater sequence. It's one where, Tom Cruise has to go aboard a submarine in which the gravity is shifting, so the water's moving back and forth, and torpedoes are bouncing around on the inside, and he has to find his way out through like doors will be shut by like debris, and so he has to go through torpedo tubes. And it's like, yeah, this is actually really cool staging, and I love how long they stick with it, with like these giant elaborate sets with like the water and the gravity shifting. Like, that's really cool. And then you get to the climax in which there's an airplane fight. And again, like we've seen, like, Cruise hanging onto planes as they go up into the air. We get more of that here, but like I said, much more creative. You have Tom Cruise hanging onto the side of planes, throwing pilots out of them, jumping back and forth into like different seats, and trying to maneuver the plane and jumping onto other planes. So yeah, they're getting a little bit creative. But I can't help but shake that feeling. It's just like it feels almost kind of like the Mission Impossible films are kind of out of ideas, because like I said, they're stunts that you've seen before, and I don't think they're as, like when I compare it to like Dead Reckoning, where they had that great train sequence and how they had to build that giant plane, they had to build that giant train for that entire sequence. That was really impressive. And the submarine sequence and the airplane sequences, they're pretty good. I must admit it. Like, I do like the footage and the close-ups they get here, and just the daring nature that Tom Cruise always puts into it. But it just kind of feels like, okay, I'm used to this by now. This is still pretty cool. It's just, it's not as impressive. And I think it's just because the Mission Impossible films, they keep trying to outdo themselves with the action scenes in each film, with like another big daring stunt each time. And eventually, those, unless you do something even more incredible the next time, it's just gonna seem weaker the more that it goes, to the point where I don't know how much longer Tom Cruise could do these movies for. Like, maybe you could, keep going the Jackie Chan route for a while, but eventually, like, the ideas are going to run a little bit thin here, and they do kind of plateau a little bit here and there. But for the most part, though, like, I know, like, I'm kind of like ragging on this film a bit, but that's only because the past two Mission Impossible films I've loved. Those have been such fantastic films, and then, to go from all that to like the closer to this saga, it just feels a bit too standard with everything that they stage here, and just like the sentimentality of it all. Like, don't get me wrong, I love the Mission Impossible films, but I'm not that attached to them where I'm getting all like misty-eyed that I'm gonna miss like Tom Cruise and Ving Rhames and Simon Pegg and all the other characters I've grown to love, and not to mention like characters who make cameos from the other films. And it's like, I had to remind myself, wait, who is this? Oh, okay, don't worry if you don't recognize the characters. They'll draw on the old footage here. In fact, they draw on the old footage a lot here. In fact, the opening of this film, I believe, has like 2 sequences where they're just recounting all of Ethan's past actions, as if to kind of like draw a line right up to what's going to happen with like the plot of The Final Reckoning. But honestly, just for the fact that there isn't as many twists here, it just kind of feels like they're shoehorning all of the Mission Impossible films into this last one to really stress that it's the final one, and that, you've got to be there and you got to enjoy it, which, it's hard for me to recommend this one, because I do like it. I do like Tom Cruise's stunts. They are impressive. They are really cool to see on the big screen. But at nearly 3 hours, the amount of just nostalgia that this film has, where just like, basks in just all the memories that have come with the Mission Impossible films, just felt like a strange detour. So as a result, it kind of feels like more of a standard popcorn entertainment blockbuster than the usual Mission Impossible films, which still had some smarts to them. And I think just this AI plot, like, it started off interesting enough. I love the fact that the entity has like people working for it, and it's kind of like almost like a cult. And I love the way that the entity is set up in The Final Reckoning, because like they previously established, the entity is an AI that can replicate voices easily, and so the entity can deceive people into believing they're being contacted by the correct person. Well, the entity goes even further by manipulating video footage. And I thought, okay, this is kind of going to be neat, because now Ethan and his team have to, they can't rely on phones, they can't rely on visuals that they see. Like, everything could be hacked. Like, they could be being deceived at every single point. They'd have to be much smarter than the AI, than the entity. But the fact that the entity itself just wants to launch nukes, and they figure this out like halfway through the film. It's not really that impressive, and it's like, okay, here's like a much simpler plot that Ethan and his crew just can go through the motions and just have all the cool stunts, and we can just like focus all our time and energy on the action scenes here, which, to its credit, it's impressive. I love like the visuals and the fights and the stunts and all that. It's just the Final Reckoning, for being the final film, it doesn't have as many twists and intrigues and smarts as it usually has, which it seems weirdly fitting. It's going from like the Mission Impossible TV series, which was all about deception and intrigue, and even like the first film had those elements to it of a lot of like surprise. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of surprises in the Final Reckoning. There's a lot of action, which we've come to be used to with these Mission Impossible films, but not as many smarts or intrigues. So for as much as I enjoyed the film, and I do think it's worth seeing on the big screen, it is a bit of a disappointment that the final Mission Impossible film has to kind of end on this almost kind of like sentimental note of just like one last mission for Ethan and his crew to stop some nukes again.